Well, hello and welcome to the After the Sermon podcast. This is a Bethany Church podcast that is designed to dive deeper into the sermon that Pastor Thad preached last week. So we're excited to talk about it. My name is Joe, and we have Tami Deleeuw with us, head of Women's Ministries.
Great to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here.
Yes.
And we also have Thad, who preached. And Thad, why don't you walk us through the sermon quick, and then we can just dive in.
I will certainly do that.
Oh, yeah.
But I did want to throw this out there. So, Tami, how did you enjoy doing announcements the week before?
Yeah.
How was that?
I
Good
didn't
question.
faint or get sick. So I'd say it was a win.
Well, I thought you did a great job. I watched, I think it was the second service. I thought you did a great job. But I just wanted to acknowledge that in some way, that was a little bit being new to the stage, right?
It was,
And I
yes.
thought that you just nailed it, and I thought it was great that we got to see you up there.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to reference that and just be a cheerleader for you. So
Thank you.
very, very cool. So yeah, new series. Parker got us kicked off last week. Thought he absolutely killed it. I'm a bit of a
did.
history buff, so I just ate all of that up. And I think too, it grounds the text in reality, right? It grounds the text in the kind of in the historical plane, right? History, human history, and allows you to see like, wow, the Bible is so real. What we're seeing here is historical. It's not just something that somebody made up. It's happened. And what's beautiful, you can look at biblical history, you can look at church history, and look at the history of the world and see how those two rub up against each other and veer together and move together all throughout history. It's so powerful to look at Western civilization, particularly and what was happening in the church at that time, even with the Catholic Church in the Dark Ages. So anyways, before I get too caught up in that, back to the message. So he got us kicked off in the book of Jeremiah. And early in this sermon series, right, we had the special video that kind of came on, which is really cool. It gives us another avenue, and you can do so much with technology and video that just kind of helps sets the stage. But I took just a few moments, again, to show how real the Bible was with connecting Jeremiah 29 with Daniel chapter 1, and even later in Daniel, where you can really see how Daniel heard what Jeremiah wrote, right, and was impacted by it. And you can even see later on in the series how you can see how Daniel kind of had a heart for Nebuchadnezzar. Contrast that with Belshazzar. He had no patience for him, right? So, but it was just one of these. It was just one of these moments where you can just see the uniqueness and the realness of the Bible. And so we took a little bit of time there just to say, this is who he wrote to. And you look over here in Daniel chapter 1, they're the same names. He was writing to these exiled, these exilic peoples here. And that was so powerful. And so as we got into the text, we talked about this idea, and Parker also covered this a little bit, of Babylonian culture, how they would go about assimilating people was to bring them in and make them Babylonian.
Yeah.
Right? And it's so true. And if you look in our text, for example, when we were covering verses 1 through 5 and even 7, they were really trying to enculturate these noblemen, Daniel and his friends and others. So listen, they were saying, listen, Judah's defeated, right? It's a national defeat. The temple's looted. There's a spiritual defeat that we see happening there. The people are individually defeated as they're brought into servitude in this foreign place. And so it's just really bad. But it goes even worse. It's worse than just being a defeated people. They're actually trying to make you become them with the idea of the education that indoctrination that they're putting them through. This further enculturated even with food and different things that they're trying to get them to eat. What really strikes out to me in verse 3 is it talks about the chief, well, in some translations it says the chief of the eunuchs or the chief officer. And probably the more accurate translation there is the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuch was over Daniel and his friends. So it could even be, and this is one of the most extreme things there, that they actually had, and we talked about this, they actually emasculated or neutered or took the opportunity to have a future away from Daniel and his friends.
That's rough.
What a powerful way to try to get them to live for the Babylonian culture, to live for the now, to dishonor God completely, but to take away your future.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, it's so amazing how Babylon would do that. And Parker kind of alluded to Babylon is America, not just America, but the world that we're living in is Babylon. And it almost seems like the world kind of strangles us. I remember when I worked right out of high school, I was 18, never been in the world really. I started a job at a crouton factory, and I was packing croutons in, and there was one guy there who was obviously a Christian because he would pray before every meal and he would read his Bible on his breaks, and it was almost like everybody hated him. Everybody mocked him whenever he would read his Bible, and I was a Christian, and I was sitting there and I was going, I ain't doing that because I'm not getting made fun of.
Right.
You know, I'm 18 years old. I want to fit in. I want to fit into Babylon. And so there's so many things in this world that want to pull us in and castrate us off from the Lord. And I noticed that at a young age that, man, I don't fit in, and I was struggling with whether I wanted to fit in or not, you know.
Yeah. So it's a hard thing. So you have, when you realize what's happening to these men, but yet you have the writing of Jeremiah say, pray for them, right? And to be there for them. And again, we don't, it's not that they did this to everyone, but this is the leadership there, the nobility. So it's just this dynamic to where, man, this is really hard. To your point, Jeremiah is asking them to do something really hard.
Absolutely.
To pray for these people, to hope for the better of society. And so sometimes in our Christian life, it's really hard. But yet we're still to love them and try to move forward with them. So anyways, in the sermon, I started with that. I brought it back to Jeremiah. I talked about how hard this was. But then there's this glimmer of hope that's really kind of a forecasting into the entire book, where in verses 18 through 21, it talks about God putting them in a place of influence so that they can truly help on a larger level. And then the idea that it mentions King Cyrus, right, in the Persian Empire. He was there until this time. And so it's interesting. Of course, Cyrus is when they come back and they get released to go back to Jerusalem at the end of 70 years. And I love Parker's point of 70 years being a lifespan, essentially, a generation. I thought that was really a good aha moment.
That was good.
That was good.
So
I always thought it was funny whenever I read Daniel 9:2 when I was younger, and it was like Daniel was like, and I perceived in the book of Jeremiah that it was 70 years, and I'm like, dude, this guy must have done some crazy math to figure it out. And then you go and you read Jeremiah, and he's like, you'll be there for 70 years. It's like,
there you go.
That's just clear.
that wasn't
He's
such
not
a big
that
deal.
smart.
there you go.
So what I think of, Andy and I are kind of sci-fi junkies, and so we love Star Trek. And do you guys know who the Borg is?
I've heard of him. I'm not
so
a junkie.
they come in and they attack, and their comment is always resistance is futile, and
Oh,
so
yeah,
it's
yeah,
kind
I've
of like,
heard that.
wow, that's what Babylon was trying to do to Daniel and his friends. So
That's good. Dave Baxley would like that
Dave would like-
reference. Yeah.
Josh Walker, he would also
Josh
like
Walker.
that. All those guys, if they were here, they would jump in.
They'd
Oh,
be
yeah,
like,
let me tell you
"Oh,
exactly
Let
who
me
they
tell you the
are.
whole story.
That's so
Give,
true.
they'll probably even tell you what
I
planet
just
they
think
came
about,
from.
I mean, if, the extreme case is correct and these gentlemen were castrated, even to remove testosterone from their system, that would take away just that natural, I mean, I've had 6 little boys and I see them bear cubbing in the fight that they have in them, and that's extreme.
Yeah, and I don't know that they had all of the medical knowledge, but they had experience and wisdom over time.
Right.
And I think all of that factored into it, because you're right. Everything from protecting the king's harem
Right.
to this willingness to be aggressive with testosterone. So I think it's all part in there. Eventually, I'll make 2 key statements there. Pivotal decisions for God, publicly or privately, matter.
Yes.
We have to recognize this. Every decision you make in your day in relation to God matters. Now, it may not matter whether you have a Mellow Yellow or Dr. Pepper to drink, but it matters the decision you're making for God. It matters because all that is either bringing you closer in integrity to Christ and hearing Him and not having a broken fellowship, or further away and being harder to hear every day. And so we have to recognize that when I'm making a decision to have my quiet time or to not have my quiet time in the morning, or if I feel that God is trying to talk to me, either am I going to stop and listen, or am I just going to go forward with my day? And so every decision matters. If God leads me to go talk to this person that I don't know, and He just says, I just feel that He wants me to go talk to him, that decision matters. I'm going to have to make that decision. Do I obey?
Yeah.
Or do I not obey?
Right.
And it matters. And then in the long run, before you honor your God, or before you can honor your God with your life publicly, you must first honor Him with your life privately. You're not going to be a Daniel and impact a kingdom or influence a lot of people until you first get your life right with Christ. The integrity of your heart. God's not going to trust you with a lot if He can't trust you with a little.
Yeah. And I think it's just those little things that are so important that like it reminds me of that there was a tree in Colorado that grew up for 500 years and withstood everything like avalanches and all these things, but then all of a sudden one day it fell over because these little beetle bugs got inside the tree and just ate it out from the inside out. And they're tiny little things that shouldn't make a difference, but there are so many little things that we do in our life that can destroy you from the inside out, and you may not even know that you're making those small decisions, but they make a huge impact.
Because I would even say when we were talking about it, and theologians, commentary people, they disagree, but like, so this whole idea about being defiled by the food. Some people will say it's a kosher issue, but we don't know that it was a kosher issue. The text doesn't say. We don't know whether it was, relegated to meat or whatever, because vegetables were also offered to gods. It was an idea of the food was sacrificed to gods. So what was it? We don't know. But other than this is what we know. That God uniquely touched Daniel and his friends with a point of personal conviction that they should not eat this food. And when I say every decisions matter, as far as I know, nothing was written for them not to eat this food.
Right.
They just said they were not going to be defiled by it.
I even read in a commentary last night that one of the reasons could be that to fellowship and eat the food would have come from the king's table. And so to eat with someone is an intimate thing. And so even to eat food that came from his table, so to speak, would have been being his friend, and they shouldn't be. And I'm like, wow. So you're right. We don't know.
We
but
don't
we do know.
But there was something there that made it
Yeah.
defiled, because later on it talks about that he is eating choice food and drink, because then he goes into a fast and says, and so I stopped eating it. So it wasn't it doesn't appear to actually be the food itself, but something was going on there
Right.
to where they said, okay, we're not going
They were
to
convicted.
defile ourselves. And again, those little things mattering to God, nothing written that we know of. There was no big light out there that made this clear that they shouldn't eat this food. But there was something there, and they heard the Spirit of God in regards to this decision, and they were obedient, and it mattered. And it mattered in that moment, and then it's going to matter later on when God tells them, okay, now stand up for something publicly.
Yeah.
And it's huge, right?
Absolutely.
But this moment had to happen first.
And this was a little moment.
It's a
like,
private, so
Tiny.
yeah.
So what? Eat the food.
Yeah,
what?
so I'll give you an example. So when I didn't grow up in church, but when I kind of heard about this story, or I heard it taught in Sunday school classes, you kind of feel like it was taught like this was a big public moment. Like, oh, Daniel refused, right? And his friends refused.
Yeah.
And this is also part of, this whole idea with, what you do in private matters is, this was a very behind the scenes thing, right? This was a very, where he went to this chief and said, listen, we don't want to defile ourselves. Can we do it this way? He says, listen, I don't want to get in trouble. He said, well, how about this?
Die?
Yeah. Test us for 10 days. And then he said, okay, you look great. Let's keep going. And of course, God honors that. And we see what happens at the end of chapter 1. But it's this dynamic to where it was a private matter where he didn't get a sign and go out and saying, don't eat the food, right? He
No
didn't make a
protesting.
spectacle. No protesting.
Yep.
He just went to an individual person and said, hey, this is where I'm at. Can we work this out because of my faith? And what's amazing about this is you don't hear this story going out, but how did it impact that overseer of the eunuchs? When he saw God honor them and saw how this turned out, there was a growing trust there. How could Daniel have ministered to him and witnessed to him in that moment through that, not only just the example, but then through the power of his God in that moment? And so it's just really amazing. And
That's good.
so for us today, I talked about the public example. So let's say that your kids are in public school and they're going to teach something. And again, I'm not saying whether you should have your kids in public or private school, but let's just say they're in public school. And they're going to teach something that you disagree with. Now, there's some that would say, oh, go get your sign, go out in front of the school and just, protest it up and make a huge deal. Or could it be that maybe you go to the teacher and just say, hey, listen, little Tim here, my son, right? I feel like what's about to be taught is kind of against what we teach at home. Or even if it's about sexual stuff, you say, listen, prefer that, according to our faith, that his mother and I talk about this and that sort of thing. And then we're going to handle that at home. So he's not going to be here that day. But I just wanted to let you know so that you didn't worry, so that you're informed. And that's just kind of what we want to do. So I just want to make sure that you're aware. That is a completely respectful way to handle that situation that honors God just as much or maybe even more than getting out there with a picket fence, and actually could open up further conversation with that teacher. Because what's that teacher going to think if you're out there with a sign picketing what he's teaching?
Mad.
Right. Or you respectfully come into him, just say, hey, listen, I want you to know this is where we are. Because there's times for picketing, right? And we're going to get to that in Daniel.
Sure.
But there's moments where it's private, it's behind the scenes, and you still honor God, you don't defile yourself, but you handle it in a way that's still loving to that, in this sense, kingdom, and to the world. You're not bowing down to the world. Because again, there's times and places to talk about what should be taught or not taught in schools. But in that moment, you can honor both God and the world system, the teacher that you're in. And so that was just one of the examples that I thought was pertinent to a conversation like this.
Yeah. No, you had some great examples. So I think my favorite one was your youth pastor example.
Yeah.
The 16.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So it's key, right? So when I was a youth pastor, it's one of those things where, so I built into these kids for years, and then when they turn 16, they get the car keys, right? And then mom and dad, I can see them saying, okay, we're going to loosen up a little bit. Now you make more of the decisions of where you go and don't go. And so what inevitably happens in a lot of cases is, the kids will still go with the parents to church on Sunday, right? Because that's a family thing we do. But the parents who had been taking them on Wednesday night to church, all of a sudden says, okay, you got the keys, you can go to church, and maybe they're not as, or you can drive, maybe they're not as forceful in saying, I want you at church. Or maybe they don't even know that you're not going to church and you're going somewhere else. And here's what's, one, I knew how good of a job and influence I had on them in regards to the decision they make. But think about these small decisions that we make, right, that are so impactful. So their first decision is, okay, well, I'm not going to go to church on Wednesday night, which, think about this. That's where your parents' views, your faith are reinforced. Positive influences, we're building into them and building them up, all of these things. If they decide not to do that, chances are the places where they're going to go are places where they have negative influence. They're not perhaps being built up, and they can make bad decisions. And you can just see this descent of bad choices begin to happen. And so your teenager, it may not seem like a big deal. They missed a Wednesday here or then, but again, over time with these other influences, it could lead them to make bad decisions. It's kind of like when a guy says, it just happened and you had an affair, right? It didn't just happen. You didn't walk into that building and say, and then you just have an affair. No, there was a series of bad decisions where you began to communicate inappropriately, spend inappropriate time together, and eventually it became that. It was a descent of bad decisions.
And I think it even goes even deeper into your thought life because, what do your parents say as you're running out the door? Make good decisions, make good choices as you're running. And I think it goes even further because if your thought life isn't correct, then that's when your choices become what you're thinking about. And so if you're going to have an affair, you never just go and make a choice to have an affair. You first think about having an affair, and then you think about it more, and then you think about it a little bit more, and then you actually pursue that affair. So
I know we talked about this earlier, but it does remind me of that Casting Crowns song. It's a slow fade when you give yourself away. People never crumble in just a day.
It's a good line.
Yeah.
That is a Casting Crowns, slow fade.
Yeah.
It's a good one, If I was a singer, I'd sing it for you, but I'm not. So not one of my
But at the end of the day, so we have what Jeremiah had spoken, had written. You see Daniel's illustration of this in this context. He had every right to be bitter, to be hurt. His country's defeated. In one sense, right, if one country's God, if they defeat your country's right. You're having all this going on. You're being indoctrinated. Perhaps you were even neutered and your future was taken away from you. You have nothing in the future left to live for other than Babylon and what you can experience, so to speak. And yet he honors God privately in this decision first. And later on, we'll see that he honors him publicly. But it's this dynamic that God showed him favor in that. And this was a first step towards a greater calling that God had for him. Because with that bravery to go to that chief of the eunuchs, that chief officer, that took guts to do that and to do that respectfully and to have that happen. But it always starts with that first step. And so I think the beauty of what we see here in Daniel as the story unfolds is you see the first step of a young man trusting in God, trusting with his life, to honor him in this way. God honors that, and you see some beautiful things happen. Over the New Testament, and in 1 Peter particularly, you see Peter talking about praying for your rulers, caring for them, respecting them, honoring them, all of these things. These are the things that we should do. And I would even say this, the majority of the time, we need to make good private decisions to honor God with our life. And when we're behind the scenes, we honor him more in those moments, because I think we have more of those moments than those big moments when we're going to stand up and picket or protest or what have you. So I think there's more of those moments. And if Christians were better at those behind-the-scene private moments, I think we would have a greater influence on society rather than just majoring on those big moments.
Yeah.
So would a good girl group question be, what are those small things that you can do? It's so hard because we don't want to be show-offy, like I do XYZ, PDQ. Or another great question could be, where in your life was there a slow fade where you made the little step that led?
I love that.
That's
slow fade. Where's the slow fade? Everybody's going to get to share on that one, pretty much.
No, I think so. I think that would be.
That is a good question. Josh, are you listening, bro?
It will be in there. The slow fade will be. I have this. The Spirit is telling me that question's going to be in there.
And I asked that because I can see that in my own life. I know I had shared with you guys, I came to school here at UWL, drinking age was 18. I had never drank a drop, and people would go out and hang at the bars, and I did, drinking my 7-Up. And then, by January, I drank some other stuff and realized that was a bad choice and went home empty and never went down that road again. But I saw how the slow fade happens. I was the good Christian girl talking to the people that were hurting, but in a place I shouldn't have been. And it was a slow fade.
That's
But that first, right, it was a series. It's this descent of bad decisions, and there's ascent of good decisions. And we'll talk about that more in the weeks to come. But that descent of bad decisions, it leads you to a place.
I'm not down on 3rd Street anymore, guys.
Yeah. And like I said, you didn't start by going down there and just going crazy.
I was seriously loving women.
It's one little this, one little this, and then before you know it, you're in the place. For me, so I'm supposed to be a pastor, right? I'm supposed to be spiritual, right? All the time in my life, I will catch myself in a descent spiritually. It's not necessarily that I'm making I'm going out doing bad things, but it's like, okay, I know that I'm working too much out of my fleshly strength rather than my spiritual strength. I need to slow down. I need to stop. I need to pray more. I need to search out God. But you know what? If I do that, somebody's going to be waiting on me. Or if I do that, there's things at the office. Or if I do that, this is going to... And sometimes I make the wrong choice and go work in my fleshly strength rather than waiting on God and trusting Him to work out the rest of my day. Literally, it happened to me this week. Except for this time, I made the right decision.
Good
and I
job.
said, I'm going to stay.
Amen, yeah.
I'm going to stay with you, God.
Ascend.
Ascent. I'm going to make the ascent of good decisions. But what happened was I came in, and man, God just supernaturally intended my day, and I got more done in that day than I had in the previous 3 or 4. Because I went to God first. And have you noticed that in your life? I mean, this is a question for you. Have you noticed in your life?
100%. Yeah, I mean, even that same thing, like getting up in the morning with the Lord at 6 a.m., it's my alarm goes off at 6, and I go, I could really use an extra hour of sleep because I'll be more productive. Whammo. And I go back to sleep. And it's always those times where my day is the worst day. And then the next day, I have to try extra hard to get up and be with the Lord. So it's just one of those things where going to bed earlier, setting your alarm, and getting out of the stinking bed is just a small thing that creates that ascension like you're talking about.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's a descent when you smack that alarm off and you go to bed late or whatever. So
don't have that quiet time. And I would even say this, and I know you have some great stories about this. It's the same thing too when you're out in the public and God tells you, go talk to that person, go minister to that person, or call this person, or write this person. And you're like, I'll get to that later. Or I'll do that later. It's like, no, I need to send this person a card, or I need to make this phone call, or send this email, or whatever. Just don't grieve the Spirit. Don't quench the Spirit. Just do what God asks. And you know what? And if you do it and it's nothing more than a person says, hey, thanks for thinking of me that day, then you've done what God had intended for you to do.
Yeah, and we're going through Samuel in a Bible study now, and Samuel hears the voice of the Lord, and he calls to him 3 times, and then finally Eli's like, God's speaking to you. Go back and say, yes, Lord, your servant is listening. What do you want? And so many times I don't think that we are trained to hear the voice of the Lord. We need to be ready to hear the voice of the Lord and then respond with, your servant is listening. And we kind of talked a lot about that, but it's just good to hear the voice of the Lord. Train yourself to slow down, like you were saying, and listen to the voice of the Lord. I promise you, you will get more done if you are spending more time with the Lord than you will right now.
And yoking yourself with people who really know you. Like for your example, Thad, if you're running on your flesh, I'm sure there are people in your life that are like, Thad's running, you know. I mean,
Your wife probably.
Yeah, I
She's
have,
the first.
Yeah, I have friends who will say to me, what idol's vying for your attention, Tam? You know, if they see frustration or so.
Frustration, negativity, you're more pessimistic than you normally are.
Right.
Complaining.
Yeah, complaining.
Complaining. That's an interesting one. That's one that I recognize in myself. And again, we all need to be able to vent. But I find that if you catch yourself complaining a lot and being negative, often that's an indicator that the peace of God is not ruling in your heart or your mind.
Yeah, and I think one that's hard, and because we're such sarcastic Americans, sometimes sarcasm can be hiding some stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And we get away with it because it's funny and, you know.
Yeah, we had a challenge in our guy group to not be sarcastic with our wives, and that was pretty hard. Because I don't know, I'm a sarcastic guy, but anyways.
Not you, Joe.
Not me. Anyways, we got like 5 minutes left. Whenever I look at Daniel, I always think about wisdom. Like the book of Daniel is wisdom. Is there anything you guys want to say about wisdom or the book of Daniel in general that we can just end with?
Do you want to go first, Tim, or you want me to go first?
Well, you go first, because I don't know that I've got wisdom on my brain. Okay.
So I think one of the things that really impressed me about Daniel is he was such a revealer of God and his power and who he is. And even though Daniel, as far as I know, never got married and was probably a eunuch, later on in the book, even when he built his house, it said that he would pray, he'd open his windows and pray toward Jerusalem. And I'm going to bring this up in a later sermon, because his house was literally built on prayer, or built for prayer. Because he built his house where his windows would open toward Jerusalem. Did you ever catch that before, right? That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. But it's like, I'm saying, man, this man's life was completely and totally sold out to God. His wisdom came from God. His interpretation of visions and dream, it all was from God. It was just, he was such a revealer of who God is and was and always will be. And again, even his house was built, designed to honor God and to pray towards Jerusalem. So I would pray that my house is built on prayer, my house is built on God, and that my life would reveal God. Now, I may never be used like Daniel, but at least to have that essence. That would be a hope.
Wow.
That's good.
And I think I'm just really challenged by, if the commentaries that I'm reading are correct, that those young men were probably between 15 and 18 years of age, and that their names that they were given by their parents reflected a love of the Lord. The names that they were given by the Babylonian captors did not reflect the Lord at all. So somehow in that 15 to 18 years, the truth, their heritage, mattered. And so we're raising kids. I know it always comes back to children for me, and I apologize, but that means that those first 15, 18 years are significant.
Yep.
So
by that time they're 16.
yeah. So our new children's pastor position and Billy's position are certainly important.
Absolutely.
Right? And the role of parents even more so.
Yeah,
and
more
their
important
kids.
than your position,
Yeah.
probably. They
Yeah.
should be paid more, huh? Hey, Billy? We should ask Billy.
I thought you meant parents should be paid more. Yes, parents should be paid more. And those guys
that's
should be
good.
too. Hey, if it was up to me, right, they would be paid more. So,
Amen.
yep.
Amen.
Great.
Well, cool. I think we'll end there. That's cool. The pastors should be paid more. That's where we're
The
at.
bottom line is yes,
So,
pastors should be
Amen.
acknowledged. You only have so much of a pie to work with, right? No,
Absolutely.
it's good. Our people are very generous.
Yeah. Well, tell us about next week's sermon.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
this is the private side. This is where you make those small decisions to honor God. And so we're going to jump over chapter 2. David's going to come back and preach on that later because, man, he got a good chapter in chapter 2.
Yeah, he was
talking
telling
about
me a
it.
little bit about it.
Yeah, he lucked out. He got that good one. But no, so we're going to skip over, go to chapter 3. And this is where it becomes public, right? So we're going to look at the private side this week. Week after that, we're going to look at the public side where they stand and they won't bow to the idol and end up getting thrown into the fiery furnace and all of that. So we're going to look at that, and so if you were to look at subtitles, right, this is Daniel's Citizen Exile, but if you were looking for greater subtitles, this would be pivotal part 1, the next one would be pivotal part 2, because your decisions you make are pivotal, both public and privately, and so this is the private side. Week after that comes the public side.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, I'm looking forward to it, and thank you for joining us on this week's podcast after the sermon. We will see you next week.